On a night where we talk about the Seawolves back in business, we mourn the loss of a New York hockey legend. John Kreiser, NHL.com alum, will be joining us at 10:35. But first, Seawolves soccer on the sports section. And, of course, you know when it starts. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the sports section. Long Island's longest-running call-in sports show, but due to COVID, the callers are the hosts. I'm Matt Mankiewich, Ken Fermin, Zach Wilson, here until midnight. Joining us at 10:35, John Kreiser, recently of NHL.com. And believe it or not, you can read his latest work on NHL.com. And the reason for it, unfortunately, is the passing of Rangers legend Rod Gilbert. We just got the announcement a little more than half an hour ago. I was able to line John up because at NHL.com, he was essentially the hockey historian. And of all the people I knew who saw Gilbert play, first one that came to mind, he kindly agreed to join us, and he will be doing so in a little more than half an hour. But in the meantime, Ken and Zach are here, and they have a lot to talk about because
I'm guessing he's still trying
even
to
though,
work.
Guys, we do have, of course, the Seawolves in business, and that means that business is soccer. And we aired the women's team's first game, which was on Thursday at Hofstra. We were supposed to air a men's game today, but someone named Henri got in the way. So, Zach, you aired it. You called the first game of the year of the 2021-22 season. But before we get into it, one thing I do have to mention, and we did talk about this in recent weeks, that because Stony Brook is now the hunted instead of the hunter in the America East Commissioners Cup standings, that expectations are high this year for everyone. Because the Commissioners Cup and other conferences do similar things with their schools, and other leagues do it too. It's kind of a general excellence trophy. So the better your teams finish, the more points you earn. The more points you earn, you win the cup. Does not necessarily mean that your team wins the championship in every sport every year. It can finish high in a bunch of sports. It's like the Formula One World Championship where you earn points. It's like the Manufacturers Championship. It's like NASCAR. It's like, you run down the list. Over the course of a season, consistency is what wins it for you. And that's what the Seawolves, every kind of Seawolf, they've been able to do. So, guys, first step towards that commitment to excellence was women's soccer. And Zach, tell us what happened.
Well, it was a good night for women's soccer, especially for all the fans that I was able to see come to the game, seeing how many people were allowed to start coming back as long as they were able to adhere to COVID guidelines, which didn't seem like too much of an issue, of course, but yeah. So it started off with, of course, the game looking pretty competitive, but judging by the score of the game, of course, Hofstra defeating Stony Brook 5-1, you can pretty much guess that was one-sided, and it really did look that way, unfortunately, because from basically the entire game, Stony Brook was on the defensive, didn't have as much time being on their opponent's side of the field as Hofstra was. They pretty much had their backs against the wall the entire time, and it was a really tough game for them to try and make it competitive as they did last time.
No, I agree. It was, again, as you said, it was great in the sense of that sense of rivalry was definitely back. We heard it in the crowd behind you were commentating. Just having the crowd, of course, kicking off the season, all that excitement that goes along with it. It definitely, was there. There was definitely a positive of the evening, especially for Stony Brook. That's about where the positives ended, as Hofstra essentially took turns just dominating the field on both ends of the grass, and it was a pretty convincing 5-1 win. I mean, it only took 5 minutes for the Pride to get on the board anyway, and I thought, really looking at those two teams, it really felt like to me the Stony Brook was just stuck in first gear the entire time and really weren't able to go up on the shift and increase like we saw Hofstra do throughout the game. It definitely seemed more like Stony Brook had, besides obviously the holes in the defense that gave up 5 goals. It was definitely, again, that slower sense. It was more like to them, they were still in the pace of you see in scrimmage, which is, you're holding back a little bit. Hofstra was running through Stony Brook the entire game. I mean, really, all you got to see is the shots differential, 16-1. And Stony Brook scored on that one shot, but that's really the whole game right there. Stony Brook barely got the ball, and when they did, they barely did anything with it.
Yeah, and I saw, Ken, that there were like numerous factors that pretty much led to a reason why Hofstra wanted to get this win more than Stony Brook, despite Stony Brook trying to get something going in this, what has been shown in recent years to be a one-sided rivalry favoring Hofstra. As I mentioned on the broadcast, the Pride were coming off a great season, but a terrible time for their first loss to come in the CAA tournament against Elon, and because of that loss, they were unable to make the NCAA tournament even as an at-large bid. And that's pretty much shocking to me after Hofstra spent most of the season inside the top 25 and looking like a team that really has made themselves quite a fortress with not many goals getting by their way. Literally 1 per game. They played 9 games last year and allowed 9 goals overall.
Yep, I agree with that, Zach. And offensively as well, they really dominated. Again, it's such a shot differential. As you said, only took Hofstra 5 minutes to find the back of the net. And Miri Taylor had volleyed a great throw-in from Lucy Shepard to open up the scoring there. And it was about maybe 8-9 minutes later that Shepard got a goal on her first attempt off a great pass, great cross. Actually, I think it was a through ball on the left wing of the field. And then for Seawolves, again, there's so many holes in that defense that they really got to refine. And again, the result isn't really that surprising. As you said, Hofstra was a sub-top 25 team. They were around that area. Everyone knows the expectation for Hofstra, and you're right, it is a lot higher than a lot of pundits see for Stony Brook. And this loss, again, could be that smack in the mouth that wakes up the Seawolves. We saw it the past couple seasons, even though Stony Brook dropped their games against Hofstra, really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things as they're able to win back-to-back conference titles. If anything, it really showed them where their weaknesses are, and I think it's going to give Coach Bischoff a great game plan going forward in terms of where they got to step up.
Now, there is a game scheduled for earlier today, the home opener for women's soccer with Quinnipiac, another non-conference team, but the game was canceled. No makeup date scheduled. Now, hold on.
Might not be one.
Just want to make sure that
it was canceled.
Yeah, no, I'm saying is that if there's any possibility of it being made up. That's my question. I'm just double-checking. It is not a conference game, therefore, that, it comes and goes. I mean, would be nice. Would have been nice for us to broadcast it. Would have been nice for them to bounce back quickly because I think they would have given Quinnipiac a better fight. But instead, they have to wait till Thursday, where they go to Brookville, take on LIU, which used to be known as CW Post, still called the Post Campus. Yeah, and then they're home against Columbia next Sunday. And that's a game we hope to bring you from Laval Stadium. So, they chug along. This was a little bit of an awakening of where, look, coaches like to do this, particularly in a situation where the Seawolves are, where they're in a mid-major conference, go up against a ranked team and see where you stand, especially early in the season, so that you can refine your game in time for the American East schedule when it kicks in. So this is it. Okay, shake it off, move on, go to Brookville, get a win.
Yeah, the LIU team, remember, they were D3 for a long time. It really wasn't until a couple years ago, a couple seasons ago, where they made the jump.
The school itself is D2, or it was for a long time.
I would say it was up until about 2 seasons ago. So this is an LIU team that, again, is still really new, still finding its footing in the D1 world. And they had a decent run last season finished just under 500 in 70 games, going 3-4. But still, I think they showed that they could definitely, at the very least, put up a fight and be competitive against D1 schools. So it's not like it's going to be a wash. But as you said, I think this is really going to be a great opportunity for the Seawolves to see where they improve, hopefully in that front, in the midfield rather, in terms of forcing pressure, getting that team press on, maybe even throwing an offside trap just to get the offense confused and create more turnover opportunities that could lead to scores on through ball. But again, they got a couple of great players to watch too in LIU. I'll focus on Kendra Oldroyd, a senior forward who has 11 career points, but was all conference a couple seasons ago. So she's someone I think where she's in the box. It's going to be real tough for Emerson Burke to get her hands on the ball when she's kicking.
Yeah, this is really going to be an interesting 2-game stretch for Stony and Brook. I know this wasn't really the start that they wanted. I'm sure that if anything, they would have probably imagined that loss to Hofstra being a little more closer as it has been in years past. But these upcoming games for Stony Brook are definitely winnable from what we can view. And for LIU, they're coming off of a 2-0 shutout loss to begin their season against the Fairfield Stags. So both of these teams, this would be their chance to capture their first win of the season. Of course, like Stony Brook, LIU had a game originally scheduled for today, but it wasn't going to be at home. It was going to be at Lafayette College. Well, of course, Lafayette was in the vicinity of Hurricane Henry, so that's exactly why they didn't get there.
Well, we'll add this about the Seawolves. You know, there's one other bright spot. It was they were able to score a goal against the Pride. They weren't shut out. And it did come off the foot of a freshman in Gabby Daniels, someone who's made her name around here locally. And I think for her to make that immediate impact, great pass too by Alyssa Francis, who is an incredible goal scorer in her own right. This time she was the one dishing out the assist. You know, I think for Daniels to do that, gets her career off on the right foot. But again, it shows that, yeah, there's a lot of names, a lot of veteran experience. We talked about Coach Bischoff a couple weeks ago on the Seawolves team. But getting the newcomers up to speed and having them play an active part in this team, especially offensively, coming off the bench like Daniels did, is only going to strengthen this team going forward, especially later down the season when you get into conference play and teams start adjusting to your play style. So it's going to be a great test for Stony Brook against LIU. Really, the great test is going to be against Columbia, another top-tier team similar to Hofstra. But a game, as you said, is winnable for the Seawolves.
And the fact that this is also the first all-time meeting between the Seawolves and the Sharks since LIU just became a D1 school just recently. And for Stony Brook, first matchup against Columbia since 2017, yet they have not defeated the Lions since 2001. So we'll see whether or not they have the ability to finally get that long overdue win. They nearly had a chance to try and do the same thing to Quinnipiac, get their first all-time win. These next few games really just about trying to get some first wins in like practically forever. And I think that's really what's trying to drive this team to its limits and trying to be just as good as they were last season, despite losing some of their key pieces like Fanny Gossen. But getting back players like Francis and DePonte can still provide a good chance for them to try and keep well, because they know that after what happened to them on Thursday, they need to try and ramp up their offense and spend more time on the other side of the field than they did back on Thursday.
Agreed.
Okay. In addition to the women's soccer game at LIU on Thursday, we do have a men's soccer game scheduled versus LIU at Laval Stadium. That's their opener. Interestingly enough, I don't see a time posted, unless I'm missing something here, because I'm looking at the master schedule. Let me double check that.
The hurricane probably is causing issues there, but I believe 6 p.m. was going to be the usual start time for a lot of these soccer games.
Right.
Yeah, usually during the weekday, it's all about 6. Yeah, usually during the weekday, games are at 6 p.m., while on the weekends, they're usually at 1 p.m. That's what you can pretty much see from the actual schedule for when.
For the most part, you're right. Except here at LIU, there's still no time posted. Let's guess 6 p.m. But most importantly, whenever they play it, they start the new season. They get Hofstra, interestingly enough, the following Monday. and then they go to Drexel, home against Columbia. So they're facing many of the same opponents as the women are non-conference. Of course, they face the same opponents in conference. Home against Fairfield, then at Ryder, and then on Saturday, September 18th, the America East kicks in, home against Vermont. So we haven't had a chance to talk about the men much, but they're underway this week.
Yeah, and they're going to be facing off against the Sharks team, who were the runners-up in the spring season, once projected to finish second in the NEC and returns one of the top point scorers in the conference from last season, in the sophomore Emil Jaskelanian, who was the NEC Rookie of the Year back in the spring.
Yeah, there's not a lot of high expectations on the Stony Brook men's soccer club, and maybe that's a good thing for them, because when they were predicted to finish pretty high up, they ended up falling to second to last in conference standings a couple seasons ago, and even in the emerged season, really struggled for most of it. So I think, the pressure wielding off them, could strengthen this team. There's still, again, a lot of question marks. Who's going to step up to be that lead scorer? Who's going to man defensively? What is it going to be like in between the pipes? But, for now, there's definitely, I think, that curiosity and those questions could strengthen this team, because you don't really know what to expect coming out of the gate. The men could put up an excellent performance and go on a run and shock a lot of teams both in and out of conference. So we'll see. But Coach Anatol's definitely got a light of fire under this team, not only because of their recent struggles, but also just for him and for this probably being the toughest stretch he's been on as a head coach for Stony Brook, and trying to end it fast.
Stony Brook men's soccer hosting the LIU Sharks on Thursday at Laval Stadium at 6 p.m. Due to broadcast crew difficulties, we will not be able to broadcast that game, but we will be bringing you a men's soccer game as soon as we can. So we got those two fall sports out of the way. Now we'll move on to the third fall sport that's also beginning late this week. The Stony Brook volleyball team, they're also ready to try and make a jump up the preseason poll, the America East. And it begins this upcoming weekend in the Florida Atlantic University tournament. They got 3 opponents to face, one of them, of course, being the Owls of FAU. This whole tournament will be taking place at their venue. And Ken, this team could looking to try and get themselves back to the form that they were when they were back-to-back America East champions. What will it take for them to try and get back to peak physical form?
Yeah, last season, that experience really wasn't there. Only one senior in Kiani Kerstetter. So as a result, and the two being pretty much an all-conference schedule, the exception of 1 or 2 games, there really wasn't that room for Stony Brook to drop 2 or 3 games, because ultimately that leaves you on the outside looking in when it's only the top 2 seeds getting in for the spring volleyball championship, which is what happened. So for them, I think it's going to be key taking these tournaments, and even if they lose, just learning from them, building from them, so they can have a strong conference season. We saw a couple seasons ago a Stony Brook team that was overlooked even after winning the conference title, and they went on a historic run, going undefeated in conference play, winning their last 17 straight games in the regular season, and ultimately winning that conference title. So Coach Belzoni has proven it really doesn't matter what the pieces are. She'll find a way to make it work and get them a title, even when it really doesn't seem that likely. But in terms of players, I think we're really going to see the next step from a couple of key attackers in mid-blocker, Eni Omalewa, Amaya DeLong, who on the outside, who has an incredible arm, great strength on the wing. She's someone who is so tough to defend against because it comes off her hands like a rocket the second she slaps that ball. I think setting-wise, they got the best setter in the conference in Julia Kim, taking over the reins of Leanne Sakowitz from a couple seasons ago. And she's so precise with her passes. And I think her greatest strength, besides the precision, is just her path. It's always so straight, so narrow, and it just keeps defenses guessing, while it really doesn't give you on the attack a chance to make an error, because you know where the ball is at all times. And obviously, getting Kiani Kerstetter, surprisingly, one more season, always a plus. Probably one of the best, if not the best, libero in Stony Brook program history.
Yeah, I'm glad that Kerstetter was able to use that extra year of eligibility, much like a lot of other players for Stony Brook who are coming back for this fall. It's probably even the winter and the spring, too, to try and give a little boost and veteran experience. Really.
And it's always going to be competitive with Stony Brook, Albany, UMBC over the past couple of seasons as well. So, to me, it's really those three teams. Any one of those three can win, especially seeing the head coach shift from a couple of seasons ago. It's in Albany's case. It really is anyone's game, I think, this conference season, especially just seeing how close the abridged conference season was in the spring. These teams know each other so well, especially with the high roster turnover.
Well, if anything, Stony Brook is once again projected to finish around 4th in the America East, but in a regular fall season, that means that they are good enough to make the America East tournament, which is usually a 4-team field. If that was the same case in the spring, then they would have also made it. But instead, it was Albany and UMBC that were fighting it all for the title, which, of course, did result in the Retrievers winning their first ever title. We'll see if Stony Brook does have a chance to make it there. They were finishing that spring with a winning record in the America East Conference. So the fact that they're bringing all these players up, they made it back. They're going to probably have that same winning record and probably even more, if not.
And that's a good sign for them this season, where, as you said, they were really dominant at the end of the season. They got off to a slow start in non-conference play, and then it started off conference play as well. But they managed to take almost all of those final 2 or 3 games at the end, and they were able to get that 4th place spot. As you said, in a normal season, that means you're making it to the playoffs. And the last time the Seawolves were a 4 seed in the postseason, they won the whole thing at Albany, which is not easy to do. So,
I think that they were actually playing against Albany, but that was back in 2019. They were the 4th seed, unless they.
Yep, that's right. They were at Albany, upset them, and then upset New Hampshire in the finals.
Well, 2019 they didn't make the NCAA tournament. I believe they fell in the semifinals to the Great Danes. I think you're probably talking about 2017.
There we go. There we go. But yeah, as I was saying, that's really all they need to second to last time they were the 4th seed. They just got to get in there, and they've proven in the past they could get it done.
Yeah, and with all these players coming back, I'm sure that we can really expect something good out of them this year. We'll probably even sneak in some broadcasts with them as well. But at the very earliest, may not be until September 7th, when that's their first home game at Pritchard Gymnasium. They'll be hosting the Hofstra Pride as well. So, now that we got volleyball out of the way, we'll be getting into football very quickly. But before we do that, we'll talk about how this was quite a summer for some former Stony Brook legends in women's lacrosse. Allie Kennedy and Taryn O'Miller, and Allie Kennedy and Kylie O'Miller, part of the first season of the Athletics Unlimited Lacrosse. And this was just a fun season to watch for all these players who were in college women's lacrosse. And it was really fun to see, especially one of our own making some good headlines, especially O'Miller leading a team of her own.
Agree. There's a lot of great local talent. Alyssa Perla from Hofstra, one of those recent college graduates who made the jump, as you indicated, Zach. Kylie O'Miller became Kylie Goldmiller and was really unstoppable for a lot of the season. I mean, she ranked 6th overall based on their point standings, had 60 MVP points. And a big reason for that was, again, she was unstoppable finding the back of the net. 31 goals, and 17 assists, which are the second best among all the athletes, over, I believe, 60 total. And that is 10-on-10 lacrosse as well, which, again, really goes to show it doesn't matter how many people are on the field. Kylie O'Miller is going to find her way to the back of the net, or she's going to find a player to get the shot to the back of the net. She was absolutely remarkable, was practically a team captain. It felt like every week. I think she was for 3 or 4 weeks, but it definitely felt like if she wasn't captain, she was usually the 1st or 2nd overall pick. I mean,
you know what?
One of the best to do it, Matt.
The amazing thing about this, and this doesn't just apply to women's lacrosse, obviously. It applies to men's lacrosse. It applies to volleyball. It applies to a lot of the Olympic sports that don't get any publicity unless they're in the Olympics. But someone comes out of college, she's only 22 years old. In any sport, a 22-year-old has a lot more development left to do. They're considered raw talents in the NFL, in the NHL, in WNBA, NBA, doesn't matter where. Because they get to refine their game against the top competition as pros. And in a case like women's lacrosse that had no professional league, you're the best in the world at something, and you can't do it anymore after the age of 22.
Yep.
This is an opportunity to see what Kylie Ohlmiller could do given the chance to develop her game. And as she matures, as a player and as a person, imagine Kylie Ohlmiller over the next 5 years. I mean, look at Kevin Crowley as a men's lacrosse player. You saw him at Stony Brook, and then you see what he's done since. And it's like mind-blowing.
In both box and field lacrosse.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kylie Miller, again, is someone who I think 24, about 2 or 3 years off of college, still on top of her game, maybe even better than how she played in college. And it's tough for her.
Oh, would have to be. Virtually everybody out of college in the pros is better than they were in college. That's just part of the development. You don't really mature as a pro athlete until your late 20s. In some cases in baseball, some say you don't even do it till you're 30.
I would say R.A. Dickey's a great example. He didn't peak till he was in his 40s.
Well, he's knuckleballer.
Yes,
but
exactly.
You get the idea. The idea being is that if your career stops with college, there's so much untapped potential. We've never seen women's lacrosse played at its absolute highest level because there hasn't been a professional league where these players would have a chance to develop their talent over the years into their late 20s and their early 30s. We started to see it now because we have a professional men's lacrosse league. We see what these guys can do. And, of course, we've always seen it with the major sports. But, kid coming out of college, he goes in with the pros. He usually gets knocked around a bit.
Yeah, agreed. And with that as well, it's really hats off to Athletes Unlimited. The former National Women's Pro Lacrosse League, rebranded under Athletes Unlimited, and seeing them really strive to not only change the game by, again, this inclusion and showcase of women's athletics, but also quite literally kind of change how we see it, having, again, 10 on 10, the field's a bit smaller, 10 on 10 gameplay, as I said. The shot clock was only 60, which is something that's been recently implemented, sort of, in the NCAA game, for at least on the women's side this upcoming season. So,
the pros have always been pioneers with that. The pros, well, first of all, the game is played at a faster pace to begin with because the players are more refined talent-wise. But, look, in my lifetime, okay, when I was a student at Stony Brook, there was no shot clock in men's basketball. There was no three-point line in men's basketball. Think about that. I mean, I was watching a little while ago, and it's on YouTube, you can, the 1985 National Championship game between Villanova and Georgetown, right? No shot clock, no three-point line. What the teams with the lead, to protect the lead, what teams used to do in the last few minutes of a game was spread out and pass the ball around. We hated it. We used to call it slime ball. We used to call it stall ball. Any team that did it was cowardly. But it meant that to get the ball back, you had to steal it. You had to somehow force a turnover, knock it free, do whatever you could do to get the ball away. Now, you're guaranteed within 30 seconds you're going to get the ball back. Now, if you have less than 30 seconds, obviously, to get it back, you have to foul somebody. But at the very least, you know that they're going to have to shoot. And the 24 in the NBA, obviously.
Yeah,
but even in lacrosse, the same thing. How many times, and this is relatively recent, you guys have seen lacrosse games, both men's and women's, without a shot clock. And you see teams sit on the ball, particularly against a team like Stony Brook women, where if they get hold of the ball, it's in the net before you can blink. What they try to do is slow them down.
Yeah.
And it rarely works, but that's what they try.
Right. I would say it didn't work in Unlimited Lacrosse either. I think it's also why we saw Allie Kennedy, again, as you said, straight off college, straight off an incredible senior season, graduate season, shine as one of the best attackers in the league. 11th overall with 15 MVP points, had 21 goals, which is 8th in the league, as well as 24 ground balls. So again, dominating on both ends of the field once again. And she's someone we're going to speak to real soon. Probably have that interview on the show next week. And something we're really excited to chat with her about for sure is one of the few to be included in the league coming off that college expansion draft. And again, hats off to her, hats off to Athletes Unlimited again, just giving these women an opportunity to shine, and really just the viewers, because this has gotten definitely some traction, not only online and social media, but on TV realm as well. So it has been great to watch. And again, just great to provide so many of these people opportunities that weren't available before.
Yes, and give not only the players a chance to develop their own talents, but to develop the game itself, to see where you can go with it.
Yeah.
Because right now, it's untapped potential. You don't know how far you can go because you've never seen these players at their absolute peak.
Or a game like this, yeah. Agreed.
And I think in lacrosse in particular, it's become a revelation what these guys can do as they develop their talent and as they build an experience. Look, for a long time, even immediately after World War II, when the NBA was, or you can go further back than that, pre-World War II, there was an NFL, but it was kind of like what the lacrosse leagues are now. I mean, they're almost, very fly-by-night. And guys would have jobs in the off season, and they wouldn't make that much money in season. And the elite, the most popular form of the sport, was college. Now, of course, that changed over time, particularly after World War II, and starting really in the 60s with the NFL and AFL. But it was the same thing that went on with football, that a lot of players became legends as college players, and that was it for them. Some even chose not to play in the NFL. They could make more money in the regular world.
Agreed. It's great just seeing these opportunities on the men's side as well. Looking at the Premier Lacrosse League with the Whip Snakes and the Water Dogs in particular, because those have a couple of Seawolves representatives with Coach Mike Chanishuk representing the Whip Snakes and Ryland Reeves, former alum, representing the Water Dogs in the PL semifinals on September 5th. That's going to be fun
that's
to watch,
even better.
Yes.
When your coach, and the guys were saying this, which one, at least one of the players, one of our current players was saying this with Chanchuk, is that here's a guy who's still an active player, a professional player, and is showing you how it's done, and not telling you what to do. Just follow me, do what I do.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
For the Whip Snakes, it is.
Now,
and Ryland Reeves still playing to his potential and level we saw in the college game. Recently named a nominee for the long stick midfielder of the year for the PLL. So when voting opens on PLL.com, definitely want to go check him out there. And finally, too, with the NOL, another opportunity, seeing guys like Pat Cashaw, Mike McCannell, Kyle Keever, all potentially getting drafted this upcoming Saturday.
Absolutely. Okay, 10:35. John Kreiser, please unmute. Okay, John, how you doing? John Kreiser.
Good, how are you?
Let's establish your background for those who don't know you already. Longtime hockey writer, going back to the 1960s. Most recently, a longtime managing editor of NHL.com. one of your many duties at NHL.com was hockey historian, and you were the go-to guy in the office whenever anybody needed historical background on anything. And as a result, you're also charged with writing a lot of the obituary players. And even though you retired at the end of last year, your work appears on NHL.com today because of the passing of Rangers legend Rod Gilbert. And
that puts it together pretty well, yes.
But let's start. Here's a guy, and this is interesting, and this is something that you can educate me on. Because when Rod Gilbert came up to the NHL, he's originally from Montreal. Now, by that point in time, was a regional draft gone? Because basically anybody with a French name wound up on the Habs.
That's pretty much true, but what happened is a Ranger scout named Yvon Prudhomme started a junior B team, and they signed Rod Gilbert, who was already had made a name for himself. And in fact, Rod proved he was not only a terrific player, but a great talent scout, because he convinced the Rangers to take the guy who was his buddy from school, and that guy was John Rattel. So Rod did a pretty good job scouting talent as well.
Well, that meant that for the first time, probably in their history, that the Rangers finally got some top talent out of Quebec, and that began their rise, because around that time, the late 50s, early 60s, they were at the bottom of the original six. They were really struggling.
They were really struggling from about they made the playoffs 3 straight years, 56, 57, 58. They fell apart down the stretch in 59, missed out on the last day of the season. And until 66, they only made the playoffs once. That was in 1962. And they lost the first 2 games to Toronto, which wound up winning the Cup. And Kenny Schinkel got hurt, and the Rangers called up Rod Gilbert from their junior team, and he came up in time for Game 4. They had won Game 3 at the Garden. They won, but they dressed Rod for Game 4, and he scored their first 2 goals. They went on to win, I believe, 4-2. He also had an assist. And when I talked to him about 15 years ago for a book that John Halligan and I did called Game of My Life about the Rangers, and he said that game, beating Johnny Bauer, who went on to be a Hall of Famer as well, gave him an incredible amount of confidence. He said he kidded Johnny Bauer later on about scoring the first one, and Bauer said, I always let the kids score the first one. He said, what about the second goal? He said, no, I didn't let you score that one.
So you got Rattel, you got Gilbert, and to round out one of the most prolific lines in the NHL at the time, Vic Hadfield, they get the nickname, and you can tell me which Rangers broadcaster came up with this, the gag line, the goal a game line for the dependability.
Yeah, it took a little while to put the pieces together. Rod and Jean Rattel played together almost from the outset, as long as they were each healthy. And Rod's career nearly ended in the mid '60s. He had a severe back injury when he was in juniors, and it came again. He had a disc issue that almost ended his career, and the Rangers had a surgeon named Dr. Yanagasawa, who did a spinal fusion on him. And Dr. Yanagasawa, who saved more than one career, got Rod to the point where he could play without an unusual amount of pain. And in the late 60s and early 70s, they put Vic Hadfield, who had been a journeyman forward, whose biggest claim to fame after the Rangers got him was that he had led the NHL in penalty minutes one year playing for a team that really was kind of known as soft back at the time. And it took a little while, but they clicked. And of course, you had the terrific year, the almost the magic year in 71-72 when Vic had 50 goals and Rattel had 109 points in 63 games before he broke his ankle. And Rod had a 97-point season and was named a first-team NHL All-Star.
And that team got to the Stanley Cup final.
That team got to the final, and John Halligan, who was the Rangers PR director for a long time and knew more about the Rangers than anybody I've ever met, always insisted to me that had Rattel not broken his ankle, that they'd have won the Stanley Cup. As it was, they put up a tough fight against a terrific Boston team. And before they lost in 6 games, it was one of the saddest nights of my life. I had to go. I was
now,
there
of course,
at the Garden and watched it.
Now, of course, the Bruins had won 2 years prior, the famous Bobby Orr diving goal. But Bobby Orr, we can talk about this to a greater degree, he redefined the game for a defenseman, redefined the position, and we could recite chapter and verse on him, but also played a big role in stopping the Rangers in 72. Did not win another cup after that, though. We can also get into that.
Well, he was the best player on the ice in 72, and which is a shame because Brad Park, who was the second best defenseman in the league and the best defenseman obviously on the Rangers, had a terrific series. And Brad Park is a first, is a top tier Hall of Famer. The only problem was that he wasn't Bobby Orr. In Game 6, the Rangers won Game 5 in Boston to push it back to Game 6, and Orr almost personally won the game. He scored 1 goal. He set up Wayne Cashman for the other 2, and it was like he was everywhere. And he was his speed, especially coming from defense. He revolutionized the way that defensemen played, because defensemen didn't jump up into the play as the way Orr did. And after that, of course, everybody wanted to find somebody like that. And if you were lucky, like the Rangers, you had Brad Park, or if you were the Canadians, you wound up with guys like Serge Savard and later on Larry Wilson. But if you were the California Golden Seals, you wound up with a guy who could jump up into play and help you once or twice and get caught and give up a 2-on-1, the other 8 times out of 10.
And I remember guys like Pat Burns saying that everybody wants to be Bobby Orr, but somebody's got to stay back and make sure the 2-on-1 doesn't start.
Yes, well, Bobby Orr had Dallas Smith, and Brad Park had his best years with the Rangers. He had Dale Rolfe, who was a very good player that Abel Francis kind of lifted from from Detroit. But yes, but Pat Burns was absolutely correct that somebody has to play defense. The thing with Orr was he could also get back on defense because he was so much faster than everybody else. He would even be fast in today's NHL, which is a much faster league than. I mean, if you go back and watch NHL films from the 70s, even from the Islanders dynasty in the 80s, it looks like they're playing in mud.
Oh, you take a look at YouTube videos of Bobby Orr, and it's like he's skating around pylons, and those pylons happen to be Hall of Famers. Yeah,
a lot of them were, and he was just he revolutionized the game. As great as Wayne Gretzky was, and Gretzky was the greatest offensive force maybe in any sport. He would he didn't necessarily revolutionize the game the way that Bobby Orr did, because Bobby Orr put defensemen into the attack. And cleared the way. After that, like I said, everybody had to have somebody who had to put their defenseman into the play. And if you watch the game today, you watch any team, certainly any good team, they want to get that fourth player, that defenseman, to get in on the play. And you don't have people who post numbers like Orr, but the game isn't played that way anymore.
Well,
but
I've seen people refer to two different kinds of defensemen, the stay-at-home type and the two-way type, and you like to have a balance of the two. But, again, you find yourselves in some situations where you have too much of one and not the other. And one team that was really great at balancing that, believe it or not, was the other guy who wore number 2. I mean, Brad Park, for example, wore number 2, and it's been said by several people, and you may have even said it yourself, that his number 2 might have been in the rafters had the Rangers pulled that cup out in 72 instead of Brian Leach's.
Very possibly. And, of course, the trade that sent him and sent, Brad and John Rattel to Boston marked the beginning of the end of the Rangers' success under Abel Francis, because it just didn't work. I mean, Phil Esposito wasn't what he was in Boston, though. He's still a pretty good player. He could get, he could score in the high 30s and low 40s, but not 60 goals like he was getting every year in Boston. They traded away John Rattel, which really didn't help Rod Gilbert any. They traded away Park, and the biggest loss was that, if you figure Rattel and Phil Esposito were kind of a wash. However, the Rangers gave up Brad Park for Carol Vadnais, which was just an awful trade. But that was getting toward the beginning and the end after they lost to the Islanders in the preliminary round in '75, and the management, not Abel Francis, but the people above him, decided that there had to be major moves, and they got rid of Eddie Giacomin, who was getting old, and they had drafted, they had obtained John Davidson from St. Louis, and some of the other guys, they either retired or they traded, and they traded Hadfield to Pittsburgh. He was good for a couple of years. But the one guy that wouldn't trade was Rod Gilbert, and he was still a very effective player until they ran Abel Francis out in the middle of the 76 season, I believe, and then John Ferguson, who had actually been an arch enemy of Gilbert with the Canadiens, was made coach and general manager, and he basically didn't like Gilbert, didn't want him around, and Rod got off to a slow start in 76, 77, and around Thanksgiving, he quote-unquote retired, which is like saying you jumped before you could be pushed. And a couple of years later, he became the first Ranger to have his number retired. Number 7 is still up in the rafters and will be for as long as the Rangers are around. And of course, Ferguson didn't last too long. He was replaced by Freddie Shero a couple of years later, and Rod became he was like Mr. Ranger. He worked in community relations and special projects, and I remember meeting him a few years ago with my son. He was down in one of the clubs at the Garden, and we happened to be able to go in that night. And I know my son, who was a grown man, he was in his mid-20s, was thrilled to be able to get a picture with Rod. He still was incredibly popular, both with people like our age, but younger people too, because he spent his whole life with the Rangers from the early '60s until today, when he unfortunately passed away.
Well, everybody who is close to the Rangers has a great Rod Gilbert story, and one of my favorites that involved me directly is that, of course, at games all the time. So you ran into him in the press room, and we were able to, talk about whatever was going on. And we're going down the elevator together after a game. And everybody knows the Garden is that the press employee entrance is at 8th Avenue and 33rd Street, which is where autograph seekers would often hang out to catch players on their way out. So Rod Gilbert had this down to a science. We're walking out. He sneaks out under my arm and bolts towards 33rd Street. And there's a girl looking for autographs and saying, "Who is that?" And everybody just started laughing.
Yeah. So, but he was, I'm sure he undoubtedly signed more autographs than anybody in Rangers history as well.
Oh, God, did he ever. I think he just wanted to get early that night. But yeah. He had down to a science. He knew. He
did. He also, it's easy to forget this now, but he also had one of maybe the greatest game, or certainly one of the 4 or 5 greatest games in Ranger history. And he did it in his hometown. He was from Montreal. In February of '68, he went up to Montreal with the Rangers and scored 4 goals and set what was believed to be an NHL record at the time. They didn't officially keep the stats as well as they do today, but he had 16 shots on goal in the Forum. And the real kicker about that, I talked to him about it for the book John Halligan and I did years later, is it was a Saturday night game in the Forum. Pretty normal for the Rangers who never played home Saturday. The Rangers go up there on Friday, and Rod goes out and has dinner with his family. And the next morning he wakes up and he's sick as a dog. Said he told me he got 103 fever, felt terrible, didn't skip the morning skate, and he was afraid he couldn't play. But he said he had bought 15 tickets for family and friends. And if you remember the Forum, getting 15 tickets on for a Saturday night game against a big rival, which the Rangers were then, because the Rangers had gotten good, was no mean feat. So he said, I had to play.
Not.
I had no choice but to play. And I don't know what they gave him before the game, but it sure worked, because he scored 4 goals. He took 16 shots, and he said if Rogie Vachon hadn't played well, he'd have had 8 goals. He had an assist, and they won 6-1, which, and this was a Montreal team that went on to win the Cup. He was, that was quite a pace. That was one of the worst pacings. I think the Canadians had lost 2 home games all year up to that point. And the Rangers just went in and whomped them, largely thanks to Rod. It was the best night of his career. And, telling me the story 40 years later, he still got a big kick out of it, because, like I said, he really didn't said he really wasn't sure he was going to be able to play. But not only did he play, but he had the game of his life.
That's amazing. And it just tells you that maybe he was just concentrating on the game, taking his mind off what was going on with the rest of his body. But first of all, who touches the puck 16 times in a game anymore, let alone take shots every time they touch it?
Well, remember too, that was pretty much a 3-line era, not the 4 lines that we use today. And it's one of those things where I'm sure they didn't track ice time again, but I'd give you odds that when everybody saw that he was having that kind of game, I'm sure Abel Francis gave him a few extra shifts.
Oh, God, he had to. And those days, obviously, if you see somebody who's hot, he's not going to rest very much. And
no, it's
probably worked out better for him.
Like basketball, when you got the hot, when guys got the hot hand, you feed him, and they would, they would feed him. And he said, like I said, he told me that had Rogie Vachon played really well. And otherwise, he might have had 8 goals.
Amazing. But also kind of par for the course for a player who is such a mainstay, because first of all, 18 years with the same team, even Bobby Orr didn't manage that. Wayne Gretzky didn't manage that. Gordie Howe didn't. No, Gordie Howe did with the Red Wings. But then he had another career after that, with the WHA and then back in the NHL at the Whalers. But that's because he played forever. But 18 years with the same team and remaining a productive player for all those years pretty much It's kind of a shame,
he was
though.
a very good player for a very, very long time.
It's kind of a shame, though, because he retired in 78, correct?
November of 77.
77. Okay, because that's about the time when the Rangers were starting to turn it around again, where Davidson was becoming the mainstay in goal, and they put together a team that got to the final in 79. But it's amazing.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
he was pretty close to done. Guys didn't necessarily play as long back then, and he'd take it. You would watch him, and people forget now because we're so used to watching the game the way it's played today that guys were smaller. I mean, Rod was 5'9", and he was listed at 5'9", 175 pounds, and that was pretty much what he was. He was very fast by standards of those days. He went to the net. He was tough. He really was. You didn't have much choice but to be tough. The Rangers didn't have, the big fighter, but they had a lot of guys who were, who were physical. The Rangers didn't want a lot of physicality from Gilbert. They wanted him to score. That was one of the reasons that Vic Hadfield fit on that line, because Vic could provide the, some physicality, but he also learned to score. He was for a long time, he was the only Ranger to score 50 goals in a season. But he was a terrific player for a long time, and I know he was very proud of the fact that he spent his whole career with the Rangers.
In spite of the fact that he did not win the cup with them.
A lot of guys don't win cups. It just happens that way. Mike Gartner scored 700 goals and never came close to, never even got to the final. Marcel Dion scored 731 goals, never got a sniff. And other guys, other guys who were in the right place at the right time. There are a lot of the Canadians who played on a team in the late 50s who have 4 and 5 rings. There are a guy, Pat Maroon, who's nobody's idea of a great player, useful player, yes, great player, no, has won 3 rings in a row. Sometimes it's a matter of being in the right place at the right time. It was a shame when it took the Rangers several years after Rod came up. Rod was one of the reasons that they got better. Abel Francis came and started building up the team after he worked his way up through the management structure, and Rod was one of the cornerstones of that team, along with guys like Rattel and Eddie Giacomin, of course, and Brad Park. And they're all in the Hall of Fame.
Interesting also that even he talked about it. You even mentioned it, that the 1994 team, which did win the Stanley Cup and was kept together for a long time and was very good for a long time, that even if they picked up Gretzky, they, of course, are gods in Rangers history, but still, there's room in that history for that other generation of Rangers. Maybe it's because people our age grew up watching them, but there's no level. Yes, everybody puts the 94 team up on a pedestal, but I talked about Brad Park's number 2 versus Brian Leetch's number 2. Gilbert's number 7 went up before everybody else's. And you can make the argument that even above Richter, Messier, Graves, Bathgate, these guys, that Gilbert was arguably the most beloved of all the Rangers alumni.
Yeah, you could definitely make that argument. Partly, of course, because he was with them. He literally spent almost 60 years with the franchise and as a player, and then in any variety of off ice posts. He was if you thought of a Ranger in history, Rod might well be the first one you thought of. Yes, Mark Messier was, is always going to be the captain, but Mark Messier won 1 cup with the Rangers. He won 5 cups with Edmonton, and had most of his best years there. But Rod was with New York for his whole career, and one reason that Brad Park's jersey his number 2 might not be up there is he basically had half a career with the Rangers and half a career with Boston. And in fact, he told me a funny story. When he and Rattel were traded, they promised each other that the Rangers would never beat them, and it took a long time for the Rangers to beat a Rattel Park team in Boston.
I could believe that. I mean, yes, you always want to beat the team that traded you, whether or not, you wanted to leave or whatever conditions were under which you were traded. But I can imagine, and I did read about this and I did hear about this, that those 2 guys in particular were extremely upset about being traded away from the Rangers because, along with Gilbert, they felt they had something good going.
Well, they had, management had told Abel Francis after they lost to the Flyers in the '74 semis, and they lost to the Islanders in the prelims in '75, which was a turning point in New York area hockey.
True.
Bill Torrey, I know, told me, and I'm sure he told a lot of other people, that was the biggest, that J.P. Parisi's goal, which won the Game 3 of the best-of-3 prelim series in overtime, was the biggest goal in franchise history, and not Bob Nystrom's famous overtime winner for the first cup. He said Parisi's goal was the one that put the Islanders on the map and made them, not just, the Rangers' little brother anymore.
That was one very important thing that Torrey and those guys were trying to do, was trying to get out from under the Rangers' shadow.
Oh, no question. And
when they emerged,
the Islanders did emerge, and I know the Rangers, and it's interesting because that goal helped trigger the trade for, the putting Eddie Jockman on waivers, and the trade that got rid of Rattel and Brad Park, and a year later, the departure of a couple years later, the departure of Rod Gilbert, who was basically just thrown away. He had a slow start to 77, 78, and I think it was right around Thanksgiving, and John Ferguson said, "You're gone." And they kind of couched it as he retired, but he had a very productive season the year before in 75, 76. He had 70-something points for a team that didn't make the playoffs and had had chewed itself into a whole different form. But they just, Ferguson didn't want him around, and he got off to a bad start. And he was older; he was in his mid-late 30s by then. He had 18. Yeah, he had a lot of mileage on the odometer, and so they said, "Oh, goodbye." But of course, it wasn't. It's not easy to chuck a franchise legend out with the garbage. And he, of course, he wound up staying another 40-something years in a bunch of positions, and a lot of Ranger fans are, generations of Ranger fans that never saw him play still knew who he was.
Absolutely. You have a book. You were talking about a book that you wrote a few years back about Gilbert, and was it also about that Ranger team? Tell me about that book.
Well, John Halligan and I did a book called Game of My Life, where we talked to a number of Rangers all the way through through the years, I actually got a phone interview with Gump Worsley a few months before he passed away. Talk about one of his games. I got Clint Smith talking about the winning the cup in 1940. He was one of the last two Rangers who were alive then, and it was funny because he didn't remember a whole lot of details about that game. Brian Hextall, Ron's grandfather or whatever, won that with an overtime goal in Game 6 in Toronto. But Smith remembered the party that the team threw afterwards. He remembered that very well. Because he said General Kilpatrick, who was the owner or whatever, the president, basically they had this big party. They told the players, because a lot of the players were from the Toronto area, and he said, I know a lot of you guys want to spend time with your families up here, and basically said, hell, bring them along, bring everybody to the party. And Smith said it was quite a party.
I can imagine. But I also was told several times that by people who were witness to it, that when the Rangers won the Cup in '94, Mark Messier passed the cup around to everybody in the room, not just players, everybody, reporters, support staff, anybody who was in the room. They all had to drink from it.
Yeah, I unfortunately missed my opportunity. I did.
Were you
I was
there?
But I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I might have been in the press room or something like that, because they had, rooms where they put guys in front of the microphones and all that, rather than in the locker room. And I missed. I had some friends who did get a chance to do it. The late Lou Friedman, who was a good friend of mine.
Yep, I know Lou.
Yeah, and he knew Glenn Healy very well, and Heels made sure that Lou took a swig from the cup, and yeah, he yes he enjoyed tweaking me about that one.
Yeah, because a little explanation for people who have not covered playoff games is that yes, there is an interview room where they'll bring coaches and select players out. But if you really want to get, the people do have to work it. People draw the duties, so to speak. But if you really want to get what's going on, you go into the locker room and you let your recorder roll in the interview room. But yeah, that's a perfect example of that.
Yes, and now this was obviously in the pre-COVID days, and things weren't as tight as they are now. Even before COVID, they're not as organized. The league, you could get, if you had the credential, obviously, you could go into that locker room and just talk to guys. I talked to Mike Richter. I think he might have been out. They might have had him out at the microphones before that. But I remember, talking to him in the locker room. Needless to say, he was elated. And in fact, we one of the other games of my life was talking to Richter about his play in the final that year, because he was tremendous. And but yes, it was fun to do that kind of book, because you get to it was like getting a rerun of your life as a fan and then a writer, because we went all the way back to John knew Frank Boucher, who scored the winning goal in the famous Lester Patrick game when the Rangers goalie got hurt in the 1928 final, and Lester traded in his suit and tie for a set of goalie pads, no mask, of course, in those days, and they won the game in overtime, went on to win the cup. But we went all the way up, and in fact, we put it out in 2006, and then a few years later, a different company called Skyhorse bought the catalog of the previous company, and I updated it with the added couple players, like Henrik Lundqvist, for example, who just retired,
Exactly.
and all that, and updated some of the other, some of the other players to what, see what they were doing now. And it amazes me still that, for example, Abel Francis is chugging along at age 95.
Yeah.
And
you don't hear much from him, though.
No, I don't know where he is in Florida as opposed to where I am in Dunedin, but I know he's been in Florida for a long time, and even back into the 2010s, every couple of years or so, he would make they'd have him at the Garden. I think he was up for a couple of the more recent number retirements when they got around to retiring Jean Rattel's number, and then of course they retired Mick Hadfield's number a couple of years later.
Yeah, well, they better get those guys
11 in honor of Hadfield as well as Marc Messier.
Well, here's the other thing too, and we were talking about this off air just before the show went on. Rod Gilbert was 80, and a lot of these guys are getting up there in years, and yeah, I mean, Tony Esposito just passed on, a week ago?
A week, 10 days ago, yeah. And, it's, my last few years with NHL.com, yeah, guys that I grew up watching, Red Kelly died, Ted Lindsay died, Stan Mikita died, and Rangers, I'm still in contact with Stan Fischler, who a friend of his had run across my obit a year or two ago when Jimmy Nielsen died, and I did an obit for him, and Arnie Brown, who was a fan favorite for a few years, and was actually, I think, the first player to play for both the Rangers and the Islanders.
Stan Fischler's 89 years old, isn't he?
Stan is 89. He's still chugging along. That's
great.
The last couple of years, Stan does a weekly historical column for the NHL, for NHL.com, and for the last 2 or 3 years that I was there, I was pretty much his editor because I had enough historical background. One reason was that I had enough historical background to stay with him, and we it was funny because I barely knew Stan at all for years and years, and then we became through circumstances we became very good friends.
Yeah, I mean, Stan, he's been, of course, a fixture of New York hockey, a fixture of New York everything. One thing that's little known about him is that he is an absolute fanatic about the history of New York transportation system, particularly the subways. He wrote a coffee table book about the subways.
Yes, he did.
And I found that. It's like, I mentioned it to him, too. Got a big kick out of it.
Yeah, well, I know. I remember one of the early times I met him. I remember telling him I had gotten, when I was in my early 20s, long before I met my wife, and I've been married for 36 years, I guess. But long before that, for my birthday, somebody gave me 2 of Stan books. This is probably in the mid-late 70s. And he got a big kick, Stan ground out books at a rate that was just awesome. And he and his wife Shirley were one of the great hockey writing combos of all time.
Oh, you see Shirley at games all the time. But I think one of the ones you're referring to is from the 1970s. It's called Everybody's Hockey Book. And I found it in a used bookstore.
I know that book. It wasn't one of them, but yes, I do know that book, and I do believe I read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he did one of the most famous books he did was with Park. He did a book called Play the Man, which PO'd a lot of people up in Boston because Park was, this was when the Rangers and Boston were maybe the biggest rivalry in the league. And Brad did not hold back his thoughts, shall we say, about his least favorite team. And of course, that was the most amazing part of that trade when they traded, because not only did they trade Park, but they traded him to their biggest rival. And there's the famous story about, of course, when they told Phil Esposito, he couldn't believe it. First of all, he couldn't believe that he was being traded. And then I think Bobby Orr and Don Cherry, who was the coach, were with him. And they came in and they had that look, like coaches and teammates have that look when you've been traded.
Right.
It's in any sport. But they go and tell, they come in with that look. It's like the look of death. And so Esposito knows that he's been traded, and he just says, just don't tell me you've traded me to New York. And they didn't say anything. And he told them, you better keep me away from the window or I'm going to jump out. So, and of course, the funny part is that Espo grew to love New York.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He became, he played for about 5 years here and had some good seasons, but not what he had in Boston. But he became a coach and a general manager. Well, he was a broadcaster and a coach and a general manager. Kept trying to bring that cup to New York and never did. And of course, now he's been, now he's down here. He was the founder, really, of the Lightning.
Right.
Ran them for quite a while, and he was, the team was bought, and he was kind of moved out. But he has been, I believe it's their radio analyst for a number of years. And Tony was 70, I think Phil's 80 now. And he's seen the team the franchise that he founded, and he had to go through some real hell and high water. One of his big backers pulled out at the last minute when they were getting ready to launch the team, and he had to go find another sponsor with millions of dollars in a very short amount of time, and he did it. They were playing in Expo Hall, which was a little 11,000 seat thing that you wouldn't even consider putting a team in today. They went and played in what's now Tropicana Field. It was the Thunderdome then, and then they managed to get the what's now Amalie Arena. It's gone through about 5 names, but that got built, right. And they have become, under Tom Vinnick's ownership, they have become a model franchise. They really have. They went through a lot of growing pains. They won the cup. They went through some more pains in the mid and late 2000s into the early 2010s. But they have become really a model franchise. They had Steve Yzerman and then Julian Brisbois. They've had good coaching. They've had smart player decisions, and Espo's gotten to watch it all from the broadcast booth.
Yeah, and he's had that second career, so to speak, because after he left the Rangers, you didn't hear much from up here, but building that Tampa Bay franchise literally from scratch and being able to witness their current glory, the first team since the Red Wings to win back-to-back?
Well, for second, the Penguins won in 2016 and 17, and
right.
But yeah, it's they've done a remarkable job, and it was funny. We moved down here just as the final was starting, and the people down there were very, very happy that the Islanders were in the rearview mirror, because nobody had any fear about dealing with the Canadians, but everybody was breathing pretty hard after the series against the Islanders.
Well, the Islanders were like cockroaches. You couldn't kill them.
No, they were, they worked very hard. They probably needed one more scorer.
Right.
It's one of those things. Maybe if Anders Lee had been healthy, but you'll never know. But they played. They gave Tampa Bay everything they wanted. They lost 1-0 in game 7 on the road. It's that there's not much you can ask of a team. And had the Islanders gotten to play Montreal, I think they'd have beaten them too.
I think they would handle them very easily.
Yeah,
but
the Canadian. I mean, I watched the final here, and there was, there was no question. I mean, one team was just markedly better than the other one.
I mean, the Habs, they had the weight of Canada on their shoulders, and
they did.
But they got back to the final by dumb luck and by some people's assessment. But they will be a force to be reckoned with later on.
Yeah, but the Islanders played very well, and the Lightning fans down here, like I said, were very happy that they were in the rearview mirror because, and it's funny too because you look at the schedule for this year, the Islanders start the season with that wonderful 13-game road trip while they finish off the new arena, and
like the Devils did.
The game 12 of that trip is down here in Tampa, and that's the only visit down here. But the Lightning don't come to Elmont until mid-March. They have 2 trips to Elmont late, like in the last 8 or 10 games of the season or so.
Coming up to see the new building?
Those will be really interesting.
Are you going to come up to see the new building?
I'm going to try. It's funny. I spent 34 years plus living in Floral Park, and the new arena is maybe 10 minutes from where I lived. And in fact, the Islanders have an office that was literally right down the street from me, about a 30-second walk. But I moved.
Timing. But
yes.
Oh well. Before we let you go, you are continuing your writing career. Maybe not with the same level of intensity of being in the office every day. But what have you been up to lately?
Well, I've done a little bit here and there. I did a piece on the history of expansion for the website of the Seattle Kraken just before the expansion draft. I've been occupied with moving and trying to sell our house on Long Island. That's taken up more of my time. But as we get closer to the season, I'll do some historic pieces. I actually did some for a couple of websites during the first 4 or 5 months of this year. And it's but it's nice. I think that people need to as with any sport, you don't want history to die off. You don't want you don't want people to forget what made the sport great and the guys who made it great and the games that you might remember that somebody else might not. You want those things to live on. I can remember when I was young and you'd hear about famous players from the 40s and 50s, and you didn't want to, and you became interested in them, and hopefully, fans of today will get interested in and stay interested in guys from the 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s. I mean, nobody, you right now, you'd probably have to be, in your early 30s to remember seeing Wayne Gretzky play. It's
true. Last game was in 1999, 22 years ago.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And, that was a most interesting game. And he, I still remember, in fact, it got me onto Sports Century when they did the Gretzky piece, because if you remember, they lost 2-1 in overtime. They were a terrible team. They lost to Pittsburgh, which was a pretty good team. And of course, the story of the game wasn't the game; it was Gretzky. And after the game, they bring him into this special media area, and he sits down, and he's still in his, and they wore their blue jerseys that day, which was unusual. Everybody wore whites at home then.
That's
right.
They
wore their blues. They wore their blue jerseys, and Wayne sat down. He's all by himself, and he took every question anybody wanted to ask. He was there for, I don't know, 20 minutes, something like that. And finally you hear, he answers a question, and whoever, I think it was John Rosasco, was the PR guy at the time, and he says, anything more for Wayne? And you could hear the chairs shuffling, and you watch Wayne sitting there, and it was fascinating because he had a mixed look on his face. Part of it was realizing that he had done the right thing, that he really wasn't going to accomplish anything more without totally disrupting his life, and it wasn't worth it. But part of it was like there was like this look on his face that, guys, don't you have any more questions? Come on, ask me something else, because he just didn't want it to end.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I remember maybe it was a year before. I'm down in the Ranger locker room. The usual, bring Messier out, bring Gretzky out, bring Richter out. And he's pretty close to finishing, Gretzky. And then a girl called behind me, must have been like fresh out of school, gets cut off by John Rosasco. Rosasco brings him back into the dressing room, pick up something, and then Gretzky comes right back out, goes straight to her, and says, "What'd you want to ask me?" It was great.
Yeah,
that was perfect. Classic.
That would be Wayne Gretzky. When I spent a lot of time at the Associated Press when I was younger, and our lead hockey writer was a guy named Ken Rappaport, who just died about a year ago. It was one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. And Kenny was covering the final back in '88 when they had the 5-game sweep with the game that was suspended and ultimately not completed in Boston because of the fog at Boston Garden. And Kenny told me a story once that back then the writers flew on the same plane as they were flying on the same plane as the Oilers, and there was going to be like a 2-day break between games, and of course it was going to be a little quiet for the writers. So long story short, Gretzky comes back to where the writers are sitting, because of course the writers are in the back of the plane, and sits down with guys and filled up everybody's notebook. They had, everybody had lots of stuff to go with, because Gretzky came back, and he must have done more of those between period interviews on television than anybody in NHL history, because you think of it, that a lot of times guys, teams from the West would only come in here once or twice. And so everybody wanted Gretzky on, to say something. So he undoubtedly did more of those things, certainly on the road, than anybody in creation.
Yep, I definitely can see them do that, and I can imagine him. Well, there are a few guys on Hockey Night in Canada, for example, because they're the ones who did the between period interviews more than anybody. I can imagine him being on all the time.
Yeah.
Anytime they got him.
Maybe the biggest difference between Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky, not on ice wise, because they were different players, but Wayne grew up, spoke English, obviously, and Mario did not. Mario's English is very limited. His team got better earlier, but he had probably from his dad, had learned that if you play nicely with the media, the rewards are immense, and you don't have to tell them, your innermost thoughts. But every now and then you'd get lucky. I got him in 2002. There was a league licensing magazine called Rinkside at the time that wanted a 20th anniversary piece on Gretzky's 92 goal season, and Wayne was coaching the Coyotes, and Rich Nairn, who's still with the Coyotes, arranged for him to call me. Was in September, so that the season, camp hadn't even started yet. And he calls me up on a Thursday evening. It was like 6:15 my time in the East. I was at my office place I was working. And he's great. He calls, "Hey, John, it's Wayne Gretzky. How are you?" And I'm like, okay. And we talked for about 15 or 20 minutes and answered anything I wanted to know. And the real kicker was that I asked him almost as a throwaway, because he scored 92 goals, which is going to stand for for who knows how long, but a long, long time. And I said, "Were you ever upset that you didn't score 100? And I'm figuring, well, it's just a throwaway question. But he, in all seriousness, I answered. He says, "Yeah, I was really disappointed." He said, "I had 92 with like 4 games left, and I didn't score anymore. And I thought I could have scored 100.
Oh, wow.
And
it's still the only guy with 200 points in a season. Lemieux came close, but he's the only one who ever did it.
Yeah.
More than once.
Yeah, and he's likely to remain the only, unless they change the way the game is played, he's going to stay that way. Nobody's ever going to catch most of those numbers. If Alex Ovechkin tops his 894 goals, it'll be one of the great achievements in sports history, because Gretzky was playing in an era where there were 7, and in one year, the year that Gretzky scored his 92 goals, the average game had a smidgen more than 8 goals per game.
Oh, nowadays, yeah, each team had a 100-point score, even the bad teams.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's 5.5 to 6 goals a game if you're lucky. And it's between the two teams. So,
well, you come up with all kinds of reasons why. I always thought there are 2 reasons I thought was reason for the dead puck era. They called it for a little while the neutral zone trap. But even when that kind of got outlawed, the defenseman can just skate better.
Yeah. So, well, Wayne said that one reason that offense went down also was that goalies were now the best athletes on the team.
That's also true.
He said when he was playing, there were like 3 or 4 goalies who were great athletes. He named Ken Dryden, who had retired, but Billy Smith and Grant Fuhr, and there might have been 1 or 2 others. But they, nowadays the goalie is almost always the best athlete on the team. And
that's
of course
very interesting, because
they play the butterfly now. Most guys do it. They can go down and up again very, very quickly. There's also something that he didn't mention, but which is true if you watch the game long enough. Especially on bad teams, the last defensive pair was usually pretty horrendous. Nowadays, nobody's that bad. The disparity in talent level has really gone down by and large. There are a couple. You might have one really bad team, like Buffalo last season was really atrocious, but you don't have 6 of them.
It's also true.
I gotta say too, John, while you're here, talking hockey, I think we gotta also touch on Henrik Lundqvist and the incredible career he's had, because announced his retirement earlier this week. Rangers already said they're raising number 30 as they should. I mean, besides the longevity of Henrik Lundqvist for the Rangers, just his performances, especially when they needed him to step up. I mean, they go down as some of the best in not only Rangers history, NHL history. I mean, go back to that 1-0 win against Pittsburgh, or rather Montreal. And the helicopter save, I mean,
That was a great save. Although, and then he made that, which bailed them out.
Yeah.
Rob Thomas Vanek, and then he got some help in the third period because might be the best defensive period they've ever played as a franchise. They were great, and it was a shame that he didn't win a cup. They had a couple of chances. The 2012 team was probably the best one he played on, and I don't think John Tortorella did a great job of coaching them in the playoffs. The 2014 team, he got them to the final, and unfortunately, the 2015 team was even better, but it was just so beat up that by the time they lost Game 7 to Tampa Bay in the Garden, Henrik gave up 2 goals and they lost 2-0, 2 goals in the third period, and they lost 2-0. And it was funny. I remember covering that game for NHL.com, and my post-game assignment was to do a Lundqvist piece. And the most interesting thing was, of course, the Rangers season had ended, but the ovation, the fans just stood and cheered for the whole team, but especially for Lundqvist, because they recognized how great he was, and he had gotten them within one period of another trip to the final.
Yeah, that loss does not fall on his shoulders, especially growing up watching him being, to me, especially here in New York, the first star, the first kind of living legend I was able to witness, and you just knew every game he was going to bring 100%. And he was going to do things that no one else in the league could do. And again, growing up 10 years ago, I think him, maybe Robert Luongo, and Carey Price, were the best goaltenders.
Yeah.
Any one of those three are probably peak goaltending. For that kind of generation coming after Brodeur, obviously, and others.
Well, the thing that you have to remember about Lundqvist is basically he walked in off the street.
Yeah,
right. I remember that.
Draft pick. He was a 7th-round draft pick in 2000, and the draft went longer then, but it was somebody, I don't know if it might have been Christer Rockstrom, told the Rangers to draft him, and he stayed over there for, well, it turned out to be 4 more seasons because of the lockout. The guy who was supposed to be the next great Ranger goalie was Al Montoya. They had drafted him high up in the first round. I believe it was in 2004, and he was going to be this big star. And then I remember he PO'd a lot of Ranger management by going back to the University of Michigan where he had played, and he was the first. He was also the first U.S. goalie to win a gold medal at the World Juniors. He beat Marc-Andre Fleury in Canada in the championship game when Fleury made a horrendous play in the third period. But Montoya was going to be the next Ranger star.
Yeah,
and he went back to Michigan, and that opened a door. And Lundqvist walked through it, and he was going to be Kevin Weeks' backup. Well, that lasted about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun. And and he just kept winning. He was really good, and he was very reliable. He could play 55, 60, 65 games a year for quite a while.
And that's something I don't think we're going to see, in the future, especially the Rangers now with Shesterkin and Georgiev as a great 10. And Isles as well with Varlamov and Sorokin. There's no way you could have just one goalie dominate, and be the starter for, 3/4 of the season when you got so many talented duos in the league. And for Lundqvist, one particular, I think just something fun is looking back. And the same thing goes well for Rod Gilbert in terms of just the teammates they played with. For Lundqvist, I mean, some legends. Like Jaromir Jagr, Dan Girardi, obviously, Ryan Callahan, Ryan McDonough, Mark Stahl, even at the end getting on Panarin's first couple of seasons with the Rangers. I mean, just the names he played alongside is remarkable.
He played alongside some very good players, but he didn't really have, except for the couple of years that Jágr really excelled. But he didn't really have, it wasn't like they were swimming in Hall of Famers outside of him.
Right.
I mean,
True.
You think of the '94 title team. They had Leach and Messier.
Right.
They had Adam Graves, who was a 52-goal scorer that year. They had a very talented team. Think who among guys that Lundqvist played with for more than like 2 or 3 years is going to go to the Hall of Fame.
Right. Yeah.
Can't think of too many. But that also sets him apart.
Jágr will, of course.
Yeah.
That was,
He needs to retire first, which ain't happening.
Well, yeah. He's still, it's when you own the team and you want to keep the team, you feel you have an obligation to keep the thing running. You do that, and he helped get them to the top division in the Czech Republic this year.
Well, even Mario Lemieux did that. But even more importantly, that kind of sets Martin Brodeur, for example, apart from Henrik Lundqvist. Not so much, yes, Marty was a great goalie in his own right and considered the greatest of all time numbers-wise, but he also had some of the greatest defensemen of his generation in front of him, like a Scott Niedermayer and a Scott Stevens.
Right, yes, he did. I mean, there was nobody equivalent to that. In front of Lundqvist, and
there were some games during that playoff run where I really felt like Dan Girardi was trying to actively let the other team score.
Well, Girardi was,
God bless him.
Girardi was a terrific shot blocker. Didn't generate much offense, and the way that hockey's analyzed now would not be an analytics favorite.
No,
shall we say, because he didn't, these days the big emphasis is on moving the puck.
Right. He cannot move that.
He was not for most of his career, he was not now he could, if you had the right partner for him, he could be useful, but he was not but he gave it everything he had, and considering that he came from, he was he's another guy who literally walked in off the street because he was never drafted. He had a terrific career, and I believe he's an assistant with the Lightning now, so he finally got his cup ring.
Yeah, yeah, it makes Lundqvist's journey too just all the more incredible. Rangers absolutely doing the right thing.
You hate to think of ill fortune, but there was a part of me that was happy that Lundqvist didn't play last season with Washington. I mean, the reason is not good, but
right.
But the fact that he spent what turned out to be his entire career with the Rangers, or entire playing career with the Rangers, is a nice thing. That he'd spent 15 seasons with the Rangers and didn't play. Every NHL game he played was for them.
Yeah.
And got the team to the final, but also considered of his generation, and that makes him a shoo-in for a Hall of Fame, the best goalie out there. I mean, name anybody who is better over that period of time.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Price was 1 and 2.
Price?
Yeah, maybe.
Let me put it this way. I went up to Montreal on vacation a few years ago, and I stopped by this art gallery, and there is a litho print of Ken Dryden and one of Carey Price. And the one of Dryden cost twice as much as the Carey Price picture, even though they're about the same size, they fit in the same frame, everything else about them similar, but Dryden went for more money than Price.
Yeah, well, the 6 Stanley Cups will do that for you.
Absolutely. John, it's been a pleasure. It's been a long time since we had a chance to talk hockey, back when I was working in the office. And the office is moving to the other side of town. I mean, some of our colleagues have been posting pictures on Facebook, and it shocks me how little has changed. But on the other hand, nobody was in it for the past 18 months, so what do you want? But
no, it was a funny feeling to go in. I went into the city in last December, to get my stuff, and then I had to go back and turn in my key and my computer and things like that. And it was a funny feeling to go back in and just see, because everybody had left. It was like, everything was still there, except the people.
It was almost like frozen in time.
That's exactly
from what people were saying.
Yes. Yeah.
One day they were in, and one day they never went back. Although I'm wondering if word got out, take your computer home.
Yeah, it did. It did. But nobody thought they'd be taking their computer home for that long.
Right.
It is amazing, though, because, well, best of luck to them, obviously, and also to you in your future endeavors, and hope to have you on a little bit closer to hockey season, because, as you were saying, that the history of sports in general, not just the game, and we have a mutual friend who always emphasized the importance of this, a fellow named Bill Shannon.
Absolutely.
And spending countless nights talking about the history of the game. And what I find myself doing, those of you who, Bill Shannon was a wire service writer, mostly for Associated Press, who covered every baseball game and also official scorer for Major League Baseball, but tragically died in a house fire in 2010, right after the ALCS. And we were always saying, had the Yankees won that last game and played another game, he would not have been in the house. But that's another story.
Yeah.
But he was the definitive historian for New York sports. And the stories that he told me, I'm sure same applies to you, John, we end up repeating to people. And that's his legacy. Yes, I repeat stuff to people that Bill Shannon told me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I worked with Bill. He was also very kind to young writers and statisticians coming out of school. I know because I was one. And then I worked with him at a startup sports database company in the 1980s that unfortunately was ahead of its time because the computer technology wasn't there to keep up with what we wanted to do. But he was just an absolute gentleman, and I don't use that term lightly.
Best way to sum him up. But John, great having you on, and we must do this again sometime.
Yes, lots of fun.
Okay, John Kreiser.
Hockey, it's a good night.
Longtime managing editor of NHL.com, and now continuing his work on the history of hockey as a freelancer, but based in Florida now, no longer in New York. But again, have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. So, Ken, we have about 12 minutes. I knew that this conversation was going to be a good one. It was going to be a nice long one. So that's why I said, let's do the Stony Brook stuff first. But we don't have a lot left. But you know what? It was great. I think you picked up a few stories, too. That we went from the passing of Rod Gilbert, which will be... Two things happened to the New York Rangers this week that are milestone moments in their history. The retirement of Henrik Lundqvist, even though he was technically no longer a Ranger, and the passing of Rod Gilbert. These are historical moments over the course of a franchise's tour through time, whatever you want to call it. But it was something we're talking about because not only did we touch on Gilbert, but everything that went on around him over the 60-plus years he was involved with the Rangers.
Okay.
And
you don't get the nickname Mr. Ranger for just being a guy. He was quite literally the franchise. And up until his passing, he is the guy when it comes to the Rangers.
Right.
We see a little bit of that too in Henrik Lundqvist, but for Yves Ziver, he's the guy. Yeah.
Sometime in the future, that could be Henrik Lundqvist if he chooses to.
Yeah.
Because he meant as much to the Ranger franchise as Gilbert did in his day when he was playing. Hank was the face of the team. And also, every single game, obviously, he's the goalie, you're going to get him, but he was the must-have. What did Hank say? It really was that important to get him. And of course, he would wait very patiently. Okay, get the guy who scored the goals, get this guy, get that guy, and I'll hang out, and when you're all done, we'll talk. He just hang out in the corner in front of his locker.
Yeah.
But absolute gentleman. And you know what he did for me and I got in trouble for? I didn't. John's not on now. I probably shouldn't. Well, John probably would give me a hard time over it too. I got a little secret. Now, I'll share it with the listeners because it's a long time ago and I got in trouble for it. We had, the NHL office twice a year would have a sample sale, which meant that all the merchandisers who were proposing items to have the NHL authentication put on them and sold in the NHL store, NHL.com, wherever, would present them to the marketing department, and they get samples. And then when the office got loaded up with too many of them, they would sell them for a nominal amount of money to the people in the office. So you get a T-shirt for a couple of bucks or something like that. And all the local teams' merchandise got snapped up in like the first 5 minutes. So I've got a Tampa Bay Lightning clock that I stuck in my kitchen. I've got T-shirts. I have this was given to me, the one I'm wearing now, the 2008 Stanley Cup playoffs. But I have a Vancouver Canucks T-shirt. I got a Detroit Red Wings T-shirt. I got jerseys, all kinds of miscellaneous stuff that I picked up from these various sample sales. But one of them was a snack table that was done in the shape of a Rangers jersey, and it was painted like a Rangers jersey. So one of us in the office came up with the bright idea because a couple of trying to remember, Dave Maloney, not Don Maloney, they're brothers, but Dave Maloney would frequently come into the office to do an NHL Live segment with one of our writers. So Dave Maloney signed this thing, and they said, okay, any ex-Ranger that comes into this office must sign this. Before every season, we get a bunch of current players to do, stock interviews.
Media round.
Things that media roundup. And we would play them and put them on the site over the course of the year. And they're all over the place. Hank walks by. I know Hank from covering him. And I said, hey, I got this snack table over here. You want to sign it? He said, yeah, sure, no problem. I caught hell for that. Because you're not supposed to ask for autographs from players. But that's in a locker room. And I said, we're not in a locker room. We're hanging out in the office.
I'm working the technicalities. I like it.
My technicality was we weren't in a locker room. But I caught hell for it. And I said, you should know better. You've been covering hockey for 20 years. It's right. I do know better. We're not in a locker room.
No. That was risky. I mean, he may have been telling the future, considering he did wind up leaving. So, there you go.
But I wonder who that stayed in the office. And somebody said, well, you could take it home. You got the autograph. I said, that's not what it was for. Shut the hell up. I said it was for the office. It was for us. Right. It was for us to have there. And we were just trying to establish some kind of of camaraderie type of thing, esprit de corps,
Right.
team building thing.
Like a branch, you know.
Yeah, because there are Ranger fans in the office. I'm an Islander fan. What do I care about Hank's autograph? I loved Hank. One of the few Rangers I can tolerate, but yeah, I loved Hank. I love Gilbert. I knew Gilbert. I hung out with him a few times. But Gilbert also has best years before the Islanders even existed. So, that was a little kid. My first hockey card was Vic Hadfield, his line mate. But that whole thing, so I always remember Hank for being so gracious as to do it and not make a fuss over it. Not that he ever would. But me getting hell for it, that was fun. That's something I can look back on and laugh.
Right.
That's the best way I can express it. So, the Mets won tonight. Yankees didn't play because of Henri. But, yes, we have a couple of minutes, and we probably should talk a little bit about this little breakout game the Mets finally had.
I see them actually wake up and play baseball. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a little bit of a breakout. It's when a team goes through a rough stretch, a good team or a bad team, but good teams, I mean, look, one of the reasons why I still believe in the Mets is because I've seen what happened to Philadelphia. I've seen what happened to Atlanta. Atlanta's red hot right now. Guess who they play next? The Yankees. You think they're going to stay hot?
If the Yankees have won their last 9 series, probably not. I mean, this turnaround, man, something.
I think all streets end. I think Atlanta will take at least one, but the Yankees are taking 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
They got San Francisco at home after just beating up on the Dodgers today. I don't think the Mets are going to lay down for the Giants this time around.
Oh, sure hope not. But, I mean, it was tough to watch, man. I mean, just the numbers. They led the league in striking out over the past 7 days. They swung more than any other team and were one of the worst in terms of actually making contact with the ball. And
I can't believe,
man. It felt like every ball that was hit felt like a ground ball. You know,
and
it was tough to watch.
They were bad. No, is this a major league team?
We've seen some awful teams, especially as following the Mets for this long. You know, go back to 2012, for example, 2013. You know, even a few of the post-World Series early 2000 teams. You know, 2009, for example, when they first came in Citi Field, it was a real bad teams. 2017, awful. But I mean, this stretch, man. Oh my gosh,
well, I'll say it again.
Stomach. It's a miracle they won 2 games this week.
The miracle from that is based primarily on the fact that despite all of this, the pitching did hold up. There weren't any real blowouts. All the games were close, which is even more frustrating because this whole season's been like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, same thing happened with the Yankees, but the Yankees, they started to break out. But look at the Yankees and look at how many. Well, first of all, they lead the league in one-run games decided by less than 2 runs and wins. More than half their wins are by less than 2 runs. 1 or 2. So, you know, you have that going for you. The losses, when they do lose, rip your heart out.
Yeah.
Yet, you can make the argument that these have enabled them to pull out more 2-1 games. Their run-scoring pace is still not where it needs to be. But
it's getting there, I think.
Boston's gone in the tank. The Rays are barely treading water. Things are looking good.
Yeah.
So
Luke Voigt has been an animal, man. He's going to win AL Player of the Week. Batting 500, 13 RBIs. The only player with more than 10 this week. Incredible run he's on.
Well, what's coming up this week in terms of games we're airing?
Well, Matt, take Zach's role. A couple of soccer matchups for you at the end of the week. Sunday afternoon, next Sunday at 1 p.m., I believe is the women's game against Colombia. And the following day, So next Monday,